Amid the continuous escalating tensions in Gaza, Germany emphasizes the need for detainee releases and political solutions over military action. Meanwhile, the U.S. president expresses optimism for peace talks between Russia and Ukraine, and Turkey confirms readiness to host negotiations between the two countries. Join our special coverage on Qnews, where we tackle the latest developments. The Arab Parliament has urgently appealed to the UN Secretary General, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and the UNICEF Executive Director for immediate action to save Gaza's children from starvation amid ongoing Israeli aggression. The President of the Arab Parliament, Mohammed El-Yamehi, highlighted unprecedented levels of hunger and malnutrition, calling for international intervention to ensure safe humanitarian corridors and uphold legal obligations to protect civilians, especially children. Gaza-based health authorities have announced that the death toll from Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip has climbed to over 52,800 and over 119,500 were wounded. Gaza's Ministry of Health has reported that Israeli occupation forces have killed 2,720 and injured 7,513 since the resumption of military operations on March 18th. German Foreign Minister has stated that his country's priority is the release of detainees in Gaza. He expressed uncertainty about whether military action would enhance Israel's security and affirmed that Gaza is part of the Palestinian territories. He emphasized that the conflict cannot be resolved through military means and advocated for political solutions to end the crisis. Additionally, he supported the U.S. plan for humanitarian aid to Gaza. Pope Leo XIV has called for the release of detainees in Gaza and urged a ceasefire in the region. He appealed to the world's nations to stop the war and welcomed the ceasefire between India and Pakistan, expressing hope that negotiations would lead to lasting peace. Additionally, he emphasized the need for genuine and enduring peace in Ukraine. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar has stated support for U.S. President Donald Trump's plan to deliver aid to Gaza. He expressed a desire to collaborate with as many organizations as possible regarding assistance for Gaza. Additionally, he emphasized the need to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. For further analysis on the situation in Gaza, we're joined from Cairo by the Professor of Political Science at Al-Quds University, Dr. Ayman El-Raqb. Dr. Ayman, thank you so much for joining us on this special coverage. And first off, the Israeli occupation forces have been appointing reserve brigades to expand its military operations in Gaza. In light of these developments, what are the chances of reaching a ceasefire agreement at this particular timing?
After greetings to you, up till this moment, there are no but attempts from Egypt and Qatar in reaching an agreement for a ceasefire. The Americans do not provide a political project, but only humanitarian project, and of course this isn't enough. It is required for an American mobilization for a ceasefire, despite certainly that it is too difficult, despite all of that, that we anticipated of a dramatic breakthrough for reaching a truce. As the American and the Israelis, that releasing the Israeli detainees will be achieved but through a political agreement, and the and what the military action wouldn't give a chance for releasing the Israeli detainees.
So the U.S.
Hasn't.
President Donald Trump is currently urging for the delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza, and actually Gideon Saar is supporting this plan. How do you interpret this?
As you pointed out previously, the Americans are talking about only a humanitarian project, project talked by Trump within the differences, in light of the differences of U.S. and America. The occupation is talking about transferring the population under the desire of accessing food, and of course, so they will be directed to this area. But the American project is talking about is establishment for areas through which to deliver the food to the population, and in the meantime to remove them to these areas. All the officials they are talking about humanitarian crisis, so that's why that should be linked to a political project. So the matter is, if it is going to only for humanitarian aid, wouldn't provide any permanent solutions, but only temporary solutions, and then we'll be having a problem in the long run. So it is required for this to be transferred into a political vision to end the occupation, to not only to deliver the food for the population, but the issue is related to a dire need for providing a political project to end the war and stop the killing against the Palestinian people.
So, sir, from your point of view, what are Trump's real strategic objectives here regarding the war in Gaza? Why is he currently pushing to end the war?
Certainly, Trump is going to visit the region in the current months. It is required from him to provide a vision, to be present before the Arab world. Firstly, he's talking about ending the war from Gaza, but the Arab is requiring from the Americans to provide a political project. The Americans, they realize this very well, as they are partners with the Americans. So I think Trump is pursuing this matter in a way or another. The second matter, that or rather there are American Israeli detainees used to a soldier that was fighting in the confrontation. So Trump is requesting to release them. So that led to the talks between Hamas and the Israelis. But this still plays only the game of negotiation. The American is trying to breach this matter. Unfortunately, what they upend the agreement are the Americans, and Wishkov proposals is in pendant the agreement agreed upon previously. Therefore, they're returning to provide an alternative project. The matter is clear, a project being discussed and adopted that should be abided with, but the Americans return to provide alternative that caused this crisis right now.
Now, sir, I have to ask you, how do you view the ongoing dispute between Trump and Netanyahu, and how will this impact the outcome of Trump's anticipated visit to the Middle East?
Some think that there might be a rupture between Trump and Netanyahu, which is out of the table, as the EU is supporting Israel with full conviction. So the talks talking about clearly the U.S. ambassador in Tel Aviv by saying that the motivations are coming in from the Holy Bible. So these are religious motivations. So we are before a very serious variables but wouldn't affect the relationship between them. So there could be attention made by Netanyahu conducting in the National Security Council and that lead to be sacked. So as he talked away of Trump that made this disagreement. But I think that it isn't going to be more far than just a tension between the two sides.
So, sir, there are reports that Trump intends to recognize a Palestinian state during his upcoming visit to the Middle East. What's your comment on this?
Frankly, it is out of the table. It is possible to recognize the state of the Palestine in the UN Security Council, but talking about a Palestinian state, the American adopted previously that they wouldn't agree to solutions. The Republicans, along with who refused such UN Security Council, both Democrats and the Republicans. So they might recognize the reports or says that he's going to intend to recognize the Palestinian state during his upcoming visit in the Middle East. Talking about the Palestinian state, geographical features are the lines of 1967 and Eastern Jerusalem as a capital that's only represents that will be only established only on a space of 20%. So would Trump to provide on these geographical limits or just to establish the Palestinian state in only Gaza and all the scattered will be marginalized? To start with, the Americans already acknowledged and adopted the proposal of more annexations of the Palestinian territories to Israel. We only trust that the only capable front to accept any solution is the United States, and we have a previous experience through Camp David Treaty and Oslo that witnessed through which dialogues in Washington. Therefore, the Americans are only the ones to convince the far-right factions in the Israeli government with the two-state solutions.
From Cairo, that was the professor of political science at Al-Quds University, Dr. Ayman Al-Raqb. Thank you so much for joining us here on Q News. We now turn to the latest developments in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. U.S. President Donald Trump has expressed optimism about a potential breakthrough for Russia and Ukraine following Russian President Vladimir Putin's proposal for peace talks with Ukraine. In his post on Truth Social, President Donald Trump suggested imminent progress in peace talks between Russia and Ukraine, saying he would continue to work with both sides. Trump's efforts have so far failed to produce peace or even a lasting ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, with fierce fighting and long-range strikes continuing since his return to the Oval Office in January. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has described Russia's consideration of ending the conflict as a positive sign, but emphasized that the first step must be a ceasefire starting May 12th. Zelensky stated that it's a positive sign that the Russians are finally thinking about ending the conflict. He also urged Russia to confirm a reliable and lasting ceasefire. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan has informed French President Emmanuel Macron that Turkey is prepared to host negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. Erdogan also communicated by phone with Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin, expressing Turkey's willingness to facilitate peace talks between the two nations. And for further analysis, we're joined from Moscow by the International Relations Professor at the Higher School of Economics, Dr. Olga Kryansk. Dr. Olga, thank you so much for joining us on this special coverage. And delving right in, will Europe pressure the Ukrainian president to accept a ceasefire agreement with Putin?
Well, I do not think that the ceasefire will be accepted by Russia because what Russia needs, what Russia suggests, it's peace talks without any conditions. So, but what Zelensky and his European partners they suggest in an ultimatum form that without any conditions, Russia should agree on the ceasefire, and that should not be accepted. And I believe it will not be accepted because we do not trust Ukraine and its American and European partners, because we would consider a potential time for Ukraine maybe to regroup, to collect more weapons or anything. So it's now it's not in Russian interest at all to agree on ceasefire.
Speaking of the conditions, how do you view Putin's conditions for sitting at the negotiation table to end the conflict?
Well, like I said, and just last night, Vladimir Putin once again announced. So we agree on peace talks, just to begin the peace talks. But from the other side, from Ukraine and the partners, that would be a stop, like a full stop for supplying Ukraine with weapons. Because what we see the opposite. Because in Europeans and Americans, they continue to supply Ukraine with weapons. So from our perspective, it means makes no sense just to agree on ceasefire when Ukraine is still supplied with weapons.
Yes, building on what you said regarding the U.S. administration, will it succeed in reaching an agreement to end the war between Russia and Ukraine from your point of view?
Well, I do not believe that Ukraine that would be an actor, an international actor that Russia will be dealing with, because Ukraine lost its sovereignty because it's totally dependent on the United States and European countries. And realistically, I believe that would be Russia and the United States who would negotiate, and the result of some negotiations which are happening. But in many cases behind the closed doors, and we just can only guess what exactly our diplomats are talking about. So, but at the end, it would be the United States and Russia who would actually decide over the Ukraine fate.
So, Vladimir Putin did not rule out reaching a ceasefire. So, if a ceasefire agreement is reached, what conditions do you think might lead to it?
Well, like I said, I do not believe that Russia would accept a ceasefire at this current situation. Why? Because we need to address initial problems which caused and led to this conflict a few years ago. So without addressing Russia's security issues, without understanding and making sure that Ukraine is a neutral state, and here is no troops, foreign troops, or here is no military bases, NATO bases on the Ukrainian territory. So without this clear understanding and this assurance, I do not believe so this conflict will end anytime soon.
Now, assessing the European leaders' statements yesterday, do you think that they are beginning to shift their stance on the continuation of the war?
Well, when we think about European states, so we should also understand that they strategically depend on the United States, on the United States military support in the form of NATO alliance. So, and political rhetoric, which comes from European leaders, it is something different comparison to actual steps. So we need to see what Europe says and what actually it does, and it would be two different things. So yes, we acknowledge what European leaders say, but what they actually are capable to do, that would be a different question.
Mm-hmm. Back to the Trump administration, what actions might Trump take if no ceasefire agreement is reached between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, we might expect that the United States will go away from this conflict because I believe Trump considers Ukraine as a burden with something that would probably limits American-Russian relations. And for a broader perspective, what America is more interested is different. It's not Ukraine. That would be the Arctic. That would be the Middle East. That would be relations with China. And of course, cooperating with Russia, or at least stabilizing the relations with Russia, that it's an American interest. But definitely, Ukraine is not the number one. It's not the priority for American foreign policy. But stabilizing the relations with Russia, that would be a priority.
Mhm. So Turkey announced its readiness to host these talks between Russia and Ukraine. How do you view this exactly?
Well, being a kind of like a mediator in this peace talks, I do not see any problem because, of course, we understand Turkey has good relations with Russia, but at the same time, Turkey is a part of a NATO alliance. So, and in this case, it's Turkey somewhere in between, but still, I do not see any problem with Turkey and with its willingness to actually to mediate this peace talk. So and we see President Erdogan, he already agreed on this.
Mhm. Now, to be more specific, what will be the outcomes of the first round?
I'm not really sure if the first round will actually happen because,
Mhm.
as we see, as Mr. Zelensky he said that they do not agree on peace talks. They would agree on ceasefire, but those things are different. So Russia laid its condition, and the conditions just to start the peace talks without any ceasefire, because starting a ceasefire, it wouldn't mean any good point for Russia. So why we actually should agree on this? So, and I actually doubt that this peace talk will happen in the following days because we see European countries and Ukraine, they wouldn't agree on this.
So, how do you interpret Zelensky's statement when he said that it's a positive sign that Putin is willing to negotiate to end the war between Russia and Ukraine?
You know, Zelensky says many different things. So, because from the beginning of this war, he permitted himself to talk with Russia and just to negotiate with Russia. Now he says, okay, so he probably would be willing to somehow negotiate with Russia. But I would doubt any like real actions taken by Ukraine without consideration or without consulting with Western partners. So whatever Zelensky say, we should understand. So it would be something what corresponds with American or with the European line.
If a ceasefire is not reached like you're predicting, what will be Ukraine's upcoming strategy here then?
Well, I do not think that Ukraine has a lot of options. So the only option, and actually what we see, it's to continue this conflict for at least a few reasons. Number one, that would be the only way for Zelensky to keep in power. That would be the second option, not the option, but understanding of the situation from the Ukrainian perspective. That would be to use Ukraine and actually to play with Ukraine in European hands to contain Russia. It is something what probably European countries are interested. So neither of these options or alternative are actually in the real Ukrainian people interest because what we see, well, it's a devastation and actually Ukraine seems to be will be disappearing as a sovereign state.
Mhm. From Moscow, that was the International Relations Professor at the Higher School of Economics, Dr. Olga. Thank you so much for joining us here on Q News. Thank you. The Kremlin has insisted that the United States and Europe stop delivering arms to Ukraine before Russia will agree to a ceasefire. Kremlin Press Secretary Dmitry Peskov argued that continued arms supplies would give Ukraine an advantage, allowing it to mobilize new troops, train military personnel, and rest its forces during the ceasefire period. Peskov emphasized that Russia is committed to achieving a settlement through diplomatic means, but with no such means available, the military operation must continue. During a visit to Kiev, German Chancellor has announced that his government will cease disclosing details about future military aid to Ukraine. He emphasized that discussions regarding arms deliveries and weapon systems will remain confidential. This decision aims to create strategic ambiguity. The Russian Defense Ministry has reported that Ukrainian forces violated the ceasefire over 14,000 times during Victory Day celebrations. The ministry stated that despite the ceasefire announcement, Ukraine continued military operations against Russia, recording 14,043 violations. Additionally, they noted that Ukrainian forces attempted to breach Russian borders 5 times and conducted 37 attacks, while Russian air defenses downed 58 drones since May 8th. And this brings us to the end of our special coverage for today. Don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNewsEG to stay informed. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more updates on Q News.